Park was not a hero. He was not a soldier. He was just a man who fixed broken things on a spaceship. 28 years old, with rough hands from years of work and a quiet nature that made him easy to forget. When he left Earth on the colony ship Horizon's Dream, he thought his biggest problem would be the broken air recycler on Deck 7. He was wrong. The ship carried 3,000 humans, families with children, scientists with dreams, workers like who just wanted a new start on a new world. They had traveled for 8 months through the black emptiness of space, and they were only 2 weeks away from their destination when everything changed. Was under the floor panels in the lower deck when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed everywhere. The ship shook hard, and he hit his head on a pipe. Blood ran down his face as he climbed out to see what was happening. Through the small window in the corridor, he saw them. Ships. Dozens of ships surrounding the Horizon's Dream like wolves around a wounded deer. They were beautiful in a terrible way, with smooth curves and glowing weapons that pulsed with blue light. The intercom crackled. Captain's voice came through, shaking with fear she was trying to hide. All passengers remain calm. We have encountered vessels from the Empire. They are demanding we surrender. Had heard stories about everyone had. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and they did not like humans. They thought humans were dangerous, unpredictable, too wild to be trusted among civilized species. The Galactic Council had agreed with them. Humanity was not welcome in the stars. The ship shook again, harder this time, grabbed the wall to stay standing. He could hear screaming from somewhere above him, children crying, parents shouting. Then the boarding parties came. They were tall, 7 feet at least, with skin covered in scales that shimmered like oil on water. They had 4 arms, each one ending in hands with too many fingers. Their faces were flat and cold, with eyes that showed no feeling at all. They moved through the ship fast and without mercy, hid behind a ventilation grate and watched as they dragged people from their rooms. They were not killing anyone, but they were not being gentle either. An old man fell, and they kicked him until he got up. A woman tried to run, and they shot her with something that made her body go stiff before she dropped. Stayed hidden. His heart was beating so loud he was sure they would hear it. Sweat dripped into his eyes, mixing with the blood from his head wound. He watched and waited. Hours passed. The screaming slowly stopped. They gathered all the humans in the main cargo bay. Was found eventually, pulled from his hiding spot by rough hands that did not care about his bleeding head. They threw him with the others. 3,000 people sat on the cold metal floor of the cargo bay. Some were crying. Some were praying. Most just stared at nothing, too shocked to understand what was happening to them. An officer walked among them. He had more decorations on his uniform than the others, and his scales were darker, almost black. He looked at the humans like a farmer looking at cattle. "Sort them," he said in a voice that sounded like stones grinding together. The sorting began. Scientists and doctors were pulled to one side, engineers and skilled workers to another. Watched as families were torn apart. A mother screamed as her children were taken from her. An old couple held hands as soldiers tried to separate them. A stopped in front of, 4 eyes looked him up and down. "What is your function?" "Maintenance," said. His voice came out as a whisper. "I fix things, air systems, water recyclers, basic repairs." They made a sound that might have been a laugh. Basic. He grabbed his arm and looked at a device on his wrist. Numbers appeared that could not read. Low value, mining stock. He was pushed toward a smaller group. About 60 people stood there, all of them looking as confused and scared as felt. These were the useless ones, the ones who had no special skills that they wanted. They were loaded onto a different ship. A prison transport realized as the heavy doors closed and locked behind them. The room was small and dark, with no windows and no seats. They stood pressed together like animals, barely able to move. The ship started moving. could feel it in his stomach, that sickening lurch of acceleration. They were leaving the horizon's dream behind, leaving their future behind, going somewhere worse. A man next to him was crying quietly. A woman near the wall kept saying her daughter's name over and over, just stood there, trying to breathe, trying to think. Days passed, or maybe weeks. It was impossible to tell in that dark room with no light and no sense of time. They were given water once a day, passed through a small slot in the door. No food, just enough to keep them alive. People started talking in whispers, sharing what little information they had. They were taking them to a mining colony, someone said, a place called Seven, a death world where prisoners worked until they died. But there was other talk too, stranger talk. "Did you hear?" a woman whispered. "They have him on this ship." "Who?" asked. The woman's eyes were wide with fear. The unbroken, the champion who cannot be killed. Had never heard the name before, but others had. An old man near him made a sign with his hands, something that looked like a prayer or a ward against evil. "He's a monster," the old man said, "and warrior. They say he's killed more beings than any soldier in galactic history. They say he once destroyed an entire army by himself. They say—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "They say he enjoys it." "Why is he a prisoner?" asked. "Because even monsters have enemies," the woman said. "The Galactic Council finally found a way to capture him. They're sending him to Seven to die in the mines like the rest of us." Leaned back against the cold wall. His head was still hurting, and his stomach felt empty and sick. Somewhere on this ship, chained in some deep dark hole, was the most dangerous being in the galaxy, and was going to the same place as him. He thought about his sister back on Earth. She would be waiting for news that would never come. She would spend years hoping he was still alive somewhere. She would never know what happened to him. He thought about his grandmother who had died 2 years before he left. She had survived so much in her long life. War, hunger, loss. She had raised a family with nothing but her own 2 hands and her stubborn refusal to quit. "Never give up," she used to tell him. "No matter what happens, you keep going, you hear me? You keep going until your heart stops, and even then you argue with death for 5 more minutes." Closed his eyes in that dark prison ship, surrounded by the sounds of suffering and despair. He did not know what waited for him on Seven. He did not know if he would survive another day, another week, another month. He did not know that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. But he knew one thing. He was not done yet. Seven was a nightmare made real. The sky was the color of poison, yellow and green clouds that never parted. The air smelled like metal and rot. Nothing grew on the surface except strange fungi that glowed in the endless twilight. And beneath that dead sky, the mines stretched down into the planet's crust like wounds that would never heal. Stepped off the prison transport with the other humans. His legs were weak from weeks of standing in that dark room. His eyes hurt from the sudden light, even though it was dim and sickly. Guards shouted at them in languages he did not understand, pushing them forward with electric prods that left burns on the skin. They were processed, scanned, tagged with metal bands around their wrists that could not be removed. A number was burned into the band. Was now prisoner 7,749,283. Not a man anymore, just a number. The mines were worse than anything he had imagined. Tunnels stretched for miles underground, held up by rusting metal beams that groaned under the weight of the rock above. Prisoners from 100 different worlds worked side by side, digging for minerals that could not name. The air was thick with dust that made breathing painful. He learned the rules quickly. Work hard or be punished. Do not look at the guards directly. Do not fight back when someone stronger takes your food. Do not help the weak because the weak will only drag you down with them. And above all, do not hope. Hope was the joke in this place. Worked, Day after day, he swung his pickaxe at the rock until his arms felt like they were on fire. He ate the thin soup they gave him and pretended it was enough. He slept on a stone floor with dozens of other prisoners and tried not to hear their crying. Weeks passed. He grew thinner but also harder. His body adapted to the brutal work in ways that surprised him. Other prisoners, aliens much bigger and stronger than him, collapsed from exhaustion or sickness. They were dragged away and never seen again, but kept going. He kept going because that was all he knew how to do. On his 32nd day, everything changed. The guards came to his sleeping area before the work shift started. They grabbed and pulled him to his feet. Other prisoners watched with empty eyes as he was dragged away. No one asked questions. Questions got you killed here. They took him to a part of the facility he had never seen, through metal doors and down long corridors until they reached a large circular room. The floor was covered in sand stained dark with old blood. High walls surrounded the circle, and above those walls were seats filled with beings watching. Understood immediately, this was an arena, a fighting pit. The guards pushed him forward. He stumbled onto the sand and looked around. The crowd was a mix of species, some he recognized and some he did not. They were cheering, laughing, making bets on what was about to happen. On the other side of the pit, a gate opened. The creature that walked out was his worst nightmare given form. It stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs, with a body covered in hard shell-like armor. Its head was all mandibles, sharp and clicking together with a sound that made stomach turn. 2 large eyes glowed red in the dim light. Of one of the deadliest predator species in known space. A guard threw something at its feet, a rusted metal pipe barely 3 feet long. This was his weapon. This was what he was supposed to fight with. They made a sound like laughter. It could not believe its luck. Its opponent was a tiny human with a stick. "Fight!" someone shouted from above. The charged had never been in a real fight in his life. He was a maintenance worker. He fixed broken pipes and faulty wiring. He was not a warrior. He was not brave. But he was human. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, were not easy to kill. There was fast but was smaller. He dove to the side as those mandibles snapped at where his head had been. He rolled in the bloody sand and came up swinging. The pipe hit the creature's side and bounced off without doing any damage. The shell was too hard. The turned and attacked again. One of its legs caught in the chest and sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, feeling ribs crack under the impact. Pain exploded through his body. He could not breathe. He could not see. The crowd was roaring. They could smell blood. They knew how this would end. But got up. He did not know why. His body screamed at him to stay down, to accept death, to stop fighting. But somewhere deep inside him, something older and stronger took control. Something that his ancestors had carried with them since the days when they hunted great beasts with nothing but rocks and sticks. Something that had helped humanity survive ice ages and plagues and wars, and every other horror the universe had thrown at them. He got up. They hesitated. It had never seen prey rise after a blow like that. This was wrong. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. Charged. It was stupid. It was suicidal. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that he was about to die. But he charged anyway, pipe raised, blood running from his mouth, broken ribs grinding against each other with every step. The caught him, its front legs wrapped around him, pulling him close. Mandibles opened wide, ready to bite his head off. But still had one arm free. With the last of his strength, he drove the rusted pipe forward, not at the creature's armored body, at its eye. The pipe went in deep. The screamed. It was a horrible sound, high and piercing, full of pain and disbelief. It dropped and stumbled backward, clawing at the metal stick stuck in its face. Hit the ground, everything hurt. He was pretty sure he was dying, but he forced himself up one more time. He grabbed the pipe and pulled it out. Then he hit again, and again, and again. He did not stop until the creature stopped moving. The arena fell silent, stood swaying in the middle of the pit, covered in blood that was not all his own. His breathing was ragged. His vision was blurring. The pipe slipped from his fingers and hit the sand with a dull thud. The crowd stared at him, prisoners who had seen 1,000 fights and thought nothing could surprise them anymore. They stared at this tiny human who had just killed a warrior with a piece of scrap metal. High above the pit, in a private viewing area reserved for the most important prisoners, something stirred. Had been watching with the bored interest of a predator who had long ago lost interest in prey. He had seen countless fights in this pit. None of them had impressed him. Why would they? He was the unbroken, the champion who had killed thousands. What could these weak creatures show him? But this was different. The human was clearly broken, ribs cracked, internal bleeding obvious from the way he moved. He should have died in the first exchange. Any reasonable being would have stayed down after that first hit. Any sensible creature would have accepted death rather than continue fighting against impossible odds. But the human had gotten up. Again and again he had gotten up. Leaned forward, his golden eyes fixed on the small figure standing alone in the bloody sand. For the first time in decades, he felt something other than boredom. He felt curiosity. The guards finally entered the pit and dragged away. He would spend the next 2 weeks in the medical wing, hovering between life and death while alien doctors decided if he was worth saving. He would survive, barely, through a combination of human stubbornness and medical intervention that was meant more for curiosity than kindness. And when he finally woke up, still hurting, still weak, still just a prisoner with a number instead of a name, he would have no idea that his life had just changed forever. Because the Unbroken had noticed him. And the galaxy's strongest warrior did not notice things by accident. Woke up in the medical wing with pain in places he did not know could hurt. His ribs had been wrapped in something that felt like plastic. His chest was covered in bruises that had turned purple and green. Every breath was a small war between his need for air and his body's screaming protest. But he was alive. The alien doctors had done their work and then moved on. He was alone in a room with gray walls and a single light that buzzed constantly. For 3 days he lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had happened. He had killed something, actually killed it, with his own hands. The thought made him feel sick, but another part of him, a darker part that he had never known existed, felt something else entirely. Pride. He had been thrown into an impossible situation and he had survived, not through luck or help, but through his own refusal to die. His grandmother would have been proud. When they finally released him back to the general population, things were different. The other prisoners looked at him differently now. They moved out of his way in the corridors. They did not try to steal his food ration. They whispered when he passed, words he could not hear but could guess at. The human who killed ate alone in the mess hall. That was nothing new. He had always eaten alone since arriving at 7. But the loneliness felt different now. Before, he had been invisible. Now he was avoided. It was a strange kind of isolation, being feared by creatures who could break him in half. He was chewing on something that might have been bread when the shadow fell over him. It was the biggest shadow he had ever seen. Looked up slowly, and his eyes kept going higher and higher until they found a face that made his blood turn cold. Stood 12 feet tall. His body was covered in thick gray hide that looked like it could stop bullets. 4 arms hung at his sides, each one rippling with muscles that seemed too large to be real. His face was wide and flat, with a mouth full of teeth and eyes the color of molten gold. And there were scars, so many scars. They covered his chest and arms in patterns that told a story of violence that stretched back centuries. Each one was a battle, each one was a victory. This was the Unbroken, the monster in the dark, the warrior who had made entire star systems tremble with fear. And he was looking right at. The entire mess hall had gone silent. Prisoners who had been eating stopped with food halfway to their mouths. Guards reached for their weapons but did not draw them. Everyone knew who was. Everyone knew what he could do if someone made him angry. Sat down across from. The bench groaned under his weight. His golden eyes studied the human with an intensity that made want to run away and hide. But there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. So did the only thing he could do. He kept eating. You fought poorly, said. His voice was deep and rough like stones being crushed together. Your technique was terrible. You had no strategy. You should have died in the first 10 seconds. Swallowed his food. His throat was dry with fear, but he managed to speak. I know. Do you? Tilted his head, a movement that was almost curious. Then why did you keep fighting? Why did you not accept death like any reasonable being would? It was a strange question. Had asked himself the same thing during those long nights in the medical wing. Why had he gotten up? Why had he kept swinging that stupid pipe even when he knew it was pointless? Because I was not done yet, said. It was the only answer he had, the only truth he knew. Stared at him for a long moment. Those golden eyes seemed to look right through him, past his skin and bones, down into something deeper. Then, impossibly, the corner of the champion's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. I have been alive for 300 years, said slowly. I have fought in wars that lasted decades. I have killed thousands of warriors, each one considered the best of their species. Generals, champions, kings. None of them impressed me. He leaned forward and had to fight every instinct screaming at him to lean back. But you, continued, you are interesting. A small, fragile creature with no training and no weapons, and yet you refused to die. You made a choice that all logic. You chose to fight when there was no hope of winning. I did not have a choice, said. If I stopped fighting, I would die. You would have died anyway. The odds were against you. Any calculation would have shown that surrender was the reasonable option. Eyes narrowed. But you did not calculate. You did not think about odds. You simply refused. That is not logic. That is something else. Did not know what to say. He had never thought of himself as special. He was just a man who fixed broken things. There was nothing remarkable about him. But seemed to see something that could not see in himself. I will train you, the champion declared. The mess hall erupted in whispers. Prisoners who had been silent suddenly found their voices. Guards exchanged worried looks. Even himself could not believe what he had just heard. Train me, he repeated. Why? Because I am bored. Stood up, his massive form blocking out the light. I have conquered every challenge this galaxy has offered me. I have won every fight. I have earned every honor. And now I sit in this prison, waiting to die slowly from the work that cannot kill me quickly. I have nothing left to do. He looked down at with something that might have been respect. You are something new, a species I have never studied, a type of warrior I have never seen. I wish to know how far your stubbornness can carry you. I wish to see if your kind has limits or if you will simply keep fighting until your heart stops. And if I die during this training? Asked. Shrugged, a movement that made his massive shoulders roll like mountains shifting. Then you will have proven that you are not as interesting as I thought. But I do not think you will die. I think you will surprise me, and I have not been surprised in a very long time. He turned and began walking away. Prisoners scrambled to get out of his path. Tomorrow, said without looking back. Before the work shift, the old storage room in Section 12. Do not be late. Then he was gone, disappearing through a doorway that barely contained his bulk. Sat alone at his table, his food forgotten. His hands were shaking. His mind was racing. He had just been chosen by the most dangerous being in the galaxy. He had been offered training by a warrior who had killed more enemies than most species had members. It could be a trap. It could be a game. It could be something worse than death. But it could also be something else. It could be a chance. Thought about his grandmother again, about her stories of surviving impossible things, about her advice to keep going no matter what, about her belief that every person was put in this universe for a reason, even if that reason was not always clear. Maybe this was his reason. Maybe he had been brought to this terrible place, had suffered through capture and imprisonment and near death for this moment, to meet this being, to learn from this warrior. Or maybe he was just a fool who was about to get himself killed. Either way, he would find out tomorrow. Looked down at his cold food. He was not hungry anymore, but he forced himself to eat anyway. He would need his strength. The galaxy's strongest warrior had taken an interest in him. And Park was not going to waste this chance. The training was harder than anything had ever experienced. Every morning, hours before the work shift began, he dragged himself to the old storage room in Section 12. His body begged him to stay in bed. His muscles screamed with pain from the day before. But he went anyway because was waiting and did not believe in excuses. The first week was the worst, did not ease him into anything. There was no warm-up, no gentle introduction. From the very first session, the champion treated like a warrior who simply needed to remember how to fight. "Your species relies too much on tools," said as he circled in the dim storage room. "You build weapons because you think you are weak, but the weapon is not what makes a warrior. The mind is. The will is." He struck without warning. One of his massive arms shot forward like a snake, tried to dodge but was far too slow. The blow caught him in the shoulder and sent him spinning into the wall. "Again," said. Got up, his shoulder was already swelling. He could barely lift his arm. "Again," repeated. This time lasted 3 seconds before hitting the floor, then 2 seconds, then less than 1. "You are thinking too much," said. "You are trying to predict what I will do. Stop predicting, start reacting. Your body knows how to survive, trust it." Easy words, harder to practice. Days turned into weeks, collected bruises like other men collected memories. His nose was broken twice. His ribs, still healing from the fight in the pit, cracked again. His knuckles split open from hitting hide, which was harder than stone. But slowly, so slowly that he almost did not notice it happening, things began to change. His reactions got faster. His movements became smoother. He learned to read body language, to see the tiny shifts in muscle that came before a strike. He could not block the champion's blows, but he learned to move with them, to reduce the damage, to stay standing longer. "Better," said one morning, after a session that left lying on the floor gasping for air. It was the first positive word he had spoken in 3 weeks. Laughed even though it hurt. "I still ended up on the ground." "Yes, but it took longer." Sat down across from him, which was strange. Usually the champion left immediately after training. "Your species adapts quickly. I have noticed this." "We have to," said, slowly pushing himself up to a sitting position. "We are not strong like you, not fast like the. We do not have natural weapons or armor. All we have is the ability to keep going." "Endurance," nodded. "I have studied your world's history since we began training. Your planet tried very hard to kill your species. Ice ages, plagues, predators larger and deadlier than you, and yet you survived." "We are stubborn." "No, you are hungry." His golden eyes fixed on with that look of intense curiosity he had shown since the beginning. "Your species does not just want to survive. You want to grow, to spread, to become more than you are. In 200 years, you went from 1 planet to 40. That took 3,000 years to achieve the same." Had never thought about it that way. To him, humanity's expansion into space was just progress, natural growth. He had never considered that other species might see it differently. "Is that why the galaxy fears us?" he asked. Was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than had ever heard it. They have a saying, "We fear what we do not understand and we destroy what we fear." He looked at his own massive hands from centuries of battle. "I have destroyed many things, armies, fleets, entire civilizations that stood against me, but I never understood my enemies. I never tried to. And now I am old and tired, and I have spent too long destroying without understanding." Met's eyes. "You are the first being I have tried to understand in a very long time. It is different." The conversation changed something between them. The training continued, still brutal, still painful, but there was something else now too. Began telling stories during their sessions. Tales of his home world, a place called Prime where the very air was poison and children learned to kill before they learned to speak. He spoke of his brother, a warrior named who had died in the wars that brought the galactic attention. "He was better than me," admitted one day. "Smarter, faster, a natural leader where I was only a weapon. When he died, I lost more than a brother. I lost the only person who ever saw me as something other than a monster." Shared his own stories, Earth's history with all its wars and wonders, his grandmother's tales of surviving hardship, his sister waiting back home, probably thinking he was dead. "You miss her," observed. "Every day." "That is good. Pain reminds us that we are still alive, that we still have something to lose." The champion's voice was heavy with memory. "When you stop feeling pain, you stop being a warrior. You become something else, something less." Months passed. His body transformed in ways he had not thought possible. The harsh conditions of 7 that killed other prisoners seemed to make him stronger. His human physiology, designed to adapt to almost any environment, responded to the challenge by becoming harder, faster, more resilient. Other prisoners noticed the change. So did the guards. Reports were sent to the warden about the strange relationship between the galaxy's deadliest warrior and the human who refused to die. Warden, with scales as black as space and a reputation for cruelty, became particularly interested. He did not like mysteries. He did not like prisoners who got stronger instead of weaker. And he especially did not like the idea of forming any kind of bond with anyone. "The human is a problem," told his officers during a private meeting. "He is giving the other prisoners ideas. Hope is dangerous in a place like this." "Should we eliminate him?" one of the officers asked. Considered the question. Simply killing would be easy enough. But it might anger, and even with all the security measures in place, no one wanted to anger the unbroken. "Not yet," decided. "But watch him. Wait for the right moment. When the time comes, I will handle this myself." Meanwhile, in the depths of the mining colony, continued his training. He had no idea that eyes were watching him. No idea that plans were being made. All he knew was that for the first time since his capture, he felt like he had a purpose. He was becoming something new, something stronger. And beside him, guiding him, was the most unlikely teacher in the galaxy. A monster who was learning to be something else. A champion who had found someone worth fighting for. The galaxy had not yet realized what was happening in the darkness of 7. But soon, very soon, everyone would understand. When the Unbroken called someone brother, the universe itself took notice. And nothing would ever be the same again. The rebellion came without warning. It started in Mine Shaft 7, deep in the lower levels where the most dangerous prisoners were kept. Someone had managed to steal weapons from a guard who had gotten careless. Word spread through the tunnels like fire. Within hours, the entire facility was burning. Alarms screamed through the corridors. Red lights flashed everywhere. The guards tried to restore order, but there were too many prisoners and too few of them. Centuries of hatred and suffering had been waiting for this moment, and now it exploded into violence. Was in Section 12 when it started. He had just finished his morning training with and was heading back to his sleeping area when the first explosion shook the ground beneath his feet. The lights flickered. Somewhere nearby, he could hear screaming. "What is happening?" he asked a prisoner running past him. "Freedom," the prisoner shouted back. "Or death, same thing in this place." Pressed himself against the wall as more prisoners rushed by. Some were armed with makeshift weapons. Others were simply running, desperate to escape the chaos. He needed to find. In a situation like this, the champion was probably the safest place to be. But before he could move, a hand grabbed him from behind. He was spun around and slammed into the wall hard enough to make his vision blur. When his eyes cleared, he saw a face that made his blood turn cold. Warden stood before him, flanked by 6 of his personal guards. His black scales gleamed in the emergency lights. His 4 eyes were fixed on with a hatred that had been building for months. "I have been waiting for this moment," said, his voice a satisfied hiss. "The chaos above is a gift. Everyone will think you died in the rebellion. No questions, no consequences." Tried to break free, but the guards held him tight. His training had made him stronger, faster, but he was still one human against 7 armed aliens. The math was not in his favor. "Your champion is not here to protect you now, mammal," continued. He pulled a plasma pistol from his belt and pressed it against his forehead. The metal was cold. "I am going to enjoy watching you burn." His mind raced. He could feel the heat beginning to build in the pistol. In a few seconds it would fire, and his skull would become vapor. Everything he had survived, everything he had learned would end here in a dark corridor far from home. But he was not afraid. Strange, he thought. He should be afraid. Any reasonable person would be afraid. But all he felt was a strange calm, a certainty that this was not how his story ended. "Any last words?" asked, finger tightening on the trigger. Met the warden's eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, "you made a mistake." Paused. "What mistake?" "You did this in the tunnels." The warden frowned. "What does that matter?" The ceiling exploded. Dropped from above like a falling star. 12 feet of fury crashed into the corridor with enough force to crack the stone floor. His roar was so loud that felt it in his bones. The guards stumbled backward, their formation breaking from pure shock. Did not give them time to recover. He moved like nothing that large should be able to move. 4 arms became a blur of violence. The first guard was dead before he could raise his weapon, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. The second and third fell together, thrown into the walls with enough force to break every bone in their bodies. Fired his plasma pistol wildly. The shots scorched stone and filled the air with smoke, but they never touched. The champion was too fast, too precise, too utterly beyond anything the warden had ever faced. In less than 5 seconds, 6 guards lay dead or dying on the ground. Only remained. Crossed the distance between them in 2 massive strides. His hand closed around the warden's throat and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. His pistol clattered to the floor. His hands clawed uselessly at the grip that was crushing his windpipe. "I have killed thousands," said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the very air. "Generals, champions, kings, the best warriors from 100 worlds. None of them made me feel anything. They were obstacles to be removed, nothing more." He glanced at, and something changed in those ancient golden eyes. The rage was still there, but there was something else beneath it, something warmer. "This human," continued, "has shown me more courage, more spirit, more worthiness than any warrior I have faced in a century of battle. He is small and fragile and should have died a dozen times, but he refused. He kept fighting when there was no hope. He kept standing when any reasonable being would have fallen." Made a choking sound that might have been a plea for mercy. "Ignored him." "On Prime we have a tradition," the champion said. "When a warrior finds another who is truly worthy, who has proven their spirit beyond any doubt, there is a bond that can be formed. A bond stronger than blood, stronger than species, stronger than anything in this universe." His voice rose to a boom that echoed through the tunnels. From this day forward, Park is my brother, my equal, my family." He threw against the wall with enough force to leave a crater in the stone. The warden slumped to the ground, unconscious but alive. "An attack on him is an attack on me," declared. "His enemies are my enemies. His honor is my honor. This is the oath of this is the bond that cannot be broken." He turned to face the surviving guards who had appeared at the end of the corridor, drawn by the sounds of combat. They stood frozen, weapons raised but hands shaking. "Spread the word," commanded. "Let the Galactic Council know. Let the High Command know. Let every being in this galaxy understand. The human is under my protection. Anyone who harms him, anyone who threatens him, anyone who even looks at him wrong will answer to me." His golden eyes swept across the terrified guards. "And I will not be merciful." The guards ran. They did not look back. Within hours, the message would spread beyond 7. Within days, it would reach every corner of the galaxy. The Unbroken, the warrior who had never shown respect to any living being, had named a human his brother. The news changed everything. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings. Military commanders rewrote their assessments of the human species. The High Command quietly dropped all charges against the surviving humans from the Horizon's dream. Because if saw something worthy in humanity, something that made him break 3 centuries of isolation to form a bond he had never offered anyone else, then perhaps they had all made a terrible mistake. Perhaps humans were not primitive savages to be conquered and enslaved. Perhaps they were something else entirely. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the prisoners of 7 were eventually freed. A new government took over the mining colony, and the old systems of cruelty were abolished. Returned to human space, but not alone. Came with him. The galaxy's strongest warrior walked among humans, learning about this strange species that had captured his interest. He watched their children play. He listened to their music. He studied their history and their art and their dreams. And everywhere he went, he told the same story. The story of a small, fragile human who refused to die, who kept fighting when there was no hope, who earned the respect of a monster and helped that monster remember what it meant to be something more. Years later, when historians wrote about the moment when humanity's place in the galaxy changed forever, they would not write about wars or treaties or political speeches. They would write about a dark tunnel on a prison world, where the universe's deadliest warrior looked at a beaten, bloody human and saw a brother. They would write about the words that echoed through the stars and made every species in the galaxy think twice before raising a weapon against humanity. They would write about the day when no one dared fire again. And in the center of that story, standing together against a universe that had tried to crush them both, were 2 warriors. One was 12 feet tall, by centuries of battle, feared across 1,000 worlds. The other was just a man who fixed broken things. Brothers, family, unbroken.